week's video message. If you remember, last week we talked about Goliath, the story of David and Goliath, in this sermon series entitled Five Smooth Stones. We learned that the story of David and Goliath is all about provision. How God used David's shepherding and harp skills to become the man of God that God wanted him to be in order to get close to Saul. And in this week, we're going to be learning about Saul and how David and Saul interacted. We're going to start reading in our Bibles in 1 Samuel chapter 18. And this is where Saul becomes jealous of David. After David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There is an immediate bond of love between them, and they became the best of friends. From that day on, Saul kept David with him at the palace and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a special vow to be David's friend, and he sealed the pact by giving him his robe, tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander in his army, an appointment that was applauded by the fighting men and officers alike. But something happened when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed Goliath. Women came out from all the towns along the way to celebrate and cheer for King Saul, and they sang and danced with joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What is this, he said. They created David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next they'll be making him their king. So from this time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, in fact, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave like a madman. Remember, we talked about last week that the Lord sent a tormenting spirit to haunt Saul. Well, here's a case when this happened. David began to play the harp, as he did whenever this happened. But Saul, who had a spear in his hand, suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David jumped aside and escaped. This happened another time too, for Saul was afraid of him, and he was jealous because the Lord had left him and was now with David. Finally Saul banned him from his presence and appointed him commander over only 1,000 men, but David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle. Now going on into verse 17. One day Saul said to David, I am ready to give you my older daughter Merab as your wife. But first you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles. For Saul thought to himself, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him rather than doing it myself. Who am I, and what is my family in Israel, that I should be the king's son-in-law? David exclaimed. My father's family is nothing. So when the time came for the wedding, Saul gave Merab in marriage to Adriel, a man from Manoah. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Micah had fallen in love with David, and Saul was delighted when he heard about it. Here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines, Saul said to himself. But to David he said, I have a way for you to become my son-in-law after all. Then Saul told the men to say confidently to David, the king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law? When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, how can a poor man from a humble family afford the price for the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported back to the king, he told them, tell David that all I want for the price of my bride is 100 Philistine foreskins. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer, so before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines and presented all their foreskins to the king. So Saul gave Michal to David to be his wife. When the king realized how much the Lord was with David and how much Michal loved him, he became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Whenever the Philistine army attacked, David was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous throughout the land. Time and time again, we'll learn that Saul tried to kill David throughout Saul's entire lifetime. So much so that Saul's own son, on a few occasions, even helped David escape from his dad, because Jonathan was a man of God and knew that David was going to be the rightful king one day. And throughout this time, we learn that David had the provision of being a shepherd. Had the provision of being a shepherd. So he was very good out in the woods because he spent a lot of time as a child in the woods being a shepherd. And we also know that when Saul was raving like a madman with the tormenting spirit, David could play the harp and help calm him down. That was a way that the Lord gave David provision, was to be able to play the harp. So not only are we learning about Saul today and what the next characteristic is going to be, but we're also building off of the story of David and Goliath with provision. And you might be wondering, what's the story all about? And how does this tie in? But we're going to learn that in just a second. If you will, turn to your Bibles and to 1 Samuel chapter 24, and this is where we're going to start learning a little bit about what's on the other side of this stone. If your Bible has title headings over chapters, it might read something like this: David spares Saul's life. After Saul returned from fighting the Philistines, he was told that David had gone into the wilderness of En-Gedi. There again, David is in the wilderness because he's running from Saul, because Saul's trying everything he can to kill him. So out in the wilderness, David has a great advantage because he was a shepherd and God had given him the provision to be a good woodsman. So that in essence has helped save David's life from Saul. So Saul chose 3,000 special troops from throughout Israel and went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats, at the place where the road passes some sheepfolds. Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. But as soon as it happened, David and his men were hiding in that very cave. So what happened? David caught Saul in a cave, literally with his pants down. Now's your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today is the day the Lord was talking about when he said, I will certainly put Saul into your power to do with what you wish. Then David crept forward and cut off a piece of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began to bother him because he had cut Saul's robe. The Lord knows I shouldn't have done it, he said to the men. It is a serious thing to attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. So David sharply rebuked his men and did not let them kill Saul. After Saul had left the cave and gone on his way, David came out and shouted after him, My lord the king. And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. Then he shouted to Saul, Why do you listen to the people who say I am trying to harm you? This very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave, and some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. for I said, I will never harm him. He is the Lord's anointed one. Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It is a piece of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves that I am not trying to harm you, and that I have not sinned against you, even though you have been hunting me down to kill me. The Lord will decide between us. Perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you were trying to do to me, but I will never harm you. As the old proverb says, from evil people come evil deeds. So you can be sure I will never harm you. Who is the king of Israel trying to catch anyway? Should he spend all this time chasing after the one who is worthless as a dead dog or flea? May the Lord judge which of us is right and punish the guilty one. He is my advocate, and he will rescue me from your power. So right here we learn that Saul was trying to kill David, and David was in a cave hiding, and David runs across Saul, who came into the cave to relieve himself. So David's men were telling David to kill Saul, but David was like, no, it's not my place to do this. I've got to be patient and wait on the Lord to do his work and get Saul out of the picture. It's not my job to kill the Lord's anointed one. And here I just said what this next rock is all about, and it's about patience. Another time we learn that David had another opportunity to kill Saul in just the next chapter, chapter 26. We'll read it now. Now some messengers from Ziph came back to Saul at Gibeah to tell him, David is hiding on the hill of Halukkah, which overlooks Jeshomen. So Saul took 3,000 of his best troops and went to hunt him down in the wilderness. Again, David is in the wilderness, learning about the provision, not learning about, but using the provision the Lord gave him as a shepherd. Saul came along the road beside the hill of Halukkah near Jeshomen, where David was hiding. But David knew of Saul's arrival, so he sent spies out to watch his movement. David slipped over Saul's camp one night to look around. Saul and his general Abner, son of Ner, were sleeping inside a ring formed by the slumbering warriors. Will anyone volunteer to go in there with me? David asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother. I will go with you, Abishai replied. So David and Abishai went right into Saul's camp and found him asleep, with his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. Abner and the warriors were lying asleep around him. God has surely handed over your enemies to you this time. Abishai whispered to David, let me thrust that spear right through him. I will pin him to the ground, and I won't need to strike twice. No, David said, don't kill him. For who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's anointed one? Surely the Lord will strike Saul down someday, or he will die in battle or of old age. But the Lord forbid that I should kill the one he has anointed. But I'll tell you what, we'll take his spear and a jug of water from here and get out of here. So let's read 9, 10, and 11 again. Abishai tells David, let me kill him. David says, no, David said, don't kill him. For who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's anointed one? Surely the Lord will strike him down someday, or he will die in battle or of old age. But the Lord forbid that I should kill the one he has anointed. But I'll tell you what. We'll take his spear and his jug of water and then get out of here. So David is telling Abishai, be patient. The Lord will deal with Saul, and I will become king when the Lord deals with Saul. But we've got to be patient. We can't take matters into our own hands. We have to be patient and let the Lord deal with Saul. So David took the spear and the jug of water that were near Saul's head. Then he and Abishai got away without anyone seeing them or even waking up. Because the Lord had put Saul's men into a deep sleep, David climbed into the hill opposite the camp until he was a safe distance. Then he shouted down to Abner and Saul, "Wake up, Abner!" "Who is that?" Abner demanded. "Well, Abner, you're a great man, aren't you?" David taunted. "Where in all of Israel is there anyone as mighty? So why haven't you guarded your master, the king, when someone came to kill him? That isn't good at all. I swear by the Lord that you and your men deserve to die because you failed to protect your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around. Where are the king's spear and the jug of water that were beside his head?" Saul recognized David's voice and called out, "Is that you, my son David?" And David replied, "Yes, my lord, the king. Why are you chasing me? And what have I done? What is my crime? But now let my lord the king listen to his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, then let him accept my offering. But if this is just simply a human scheme, then may those involved be cursed by the Lord. For you have driven me from my home, so I can no longer live among the Lord's people and worship as I should. Must I die on foreign shore, fall away from the presence of the Lord? Why has the king of Israel come out to search for a single flea? Why does he hunt me down like a partridge on a mountain?" Then Saul confessed, "I have sinned. Come back home, my son, and I will no longer try to harm you. For you have valued my life today. I have been a fool, and very, very wrong." "Here is your spear, O king," David replied. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord gives his own reward for doing good and for being loyal, and I refuse to kill you even when the Lord placed you in my power, for you are the Lord's anointed one." So there again, David is saying, I was patient. I had the chance to kill you and become king just as the Lord said, but I was patient. I spared your life, and I'm letting the Lord deal with you. I'm not taking matters into my own hands. May he rescue me from all my troubles. And Saul said to David, "Blessings on you, my son David. You will do heroic deeds and be a great conqueror." Then David went away, and Saul returned home. Next, we're going to talk about the death of Saul and how David's patience pays off. The death of Saul can be found in chapter 31, which is the very last chapter of the book of 1 Samuel. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, forcing the Israelites to flee. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him severely. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines run me through and humiliate me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. So we learn that Saul was wounded in battle, and then he was so severely wounded in battle and afraid of what the Philistines were going to do that he decided to kill himself. It says he took his sword and he fell on it. So Saul committed suicide after being wounded in battle. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword too and died beside the king. So also the armor-bearer committed suicide after the king at the time Saul was wounded in battle. So Saul, 3 of his sons, his armor-bearer, and his troops all died together that same day. When the Israelites on the other side of the Jezreel Valley and beyond the Jordan River saw that his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines were out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gibeah. So they cut off Saul's head and stripped him of his armor. Then they proclaimed the news of Saul's death in their pagan temple and to all the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths, and then they fastened his body to the wall of the city of Bethshan. But when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, their warriors traveled all through the night to Bethshan, and took the bodies of Saul and his dead sons down from the wall. They brought them to Jezbeth, where they burned the bodies. Then they took their remains and buried him beneath the tamarisk tree at Jebeth, and there they fasted for 7 days. So we learn here in verse 31 that all of David's patience towards Saul had paid off. David didn't need to harm Saul. Saul was in battle with the Philistines again, and the Philistines wounded him, and Saul ended up taking his own life. This sets up next week's lesson, where we're going to learn about how David becomes king and talk about the third rock. So again, just like last week, I invite you to still carry around your Goliath stone, or whatever you've named your stone, and whatever provision it is that the Lord has been raising you up to do. And I want you to continue to pray for provision. And if you don't know what that provision is, continue to pray for what that provision is for your life. Along with that stone, I want you to label your second stone. Remember, I had asked you to choose 5 smooth stones last week. On stone number 2, I want you to write the word patience, and then an area of your life where you need more patience. Stick both of these stones in your pocket, just like last week. Stick them in there together, so you'll be reminded to pray for provision and patience. Thank you for tuning in, and tune in next week when we learn about the third smooth stone.